Hey everyone, welcome to Beyond. Be sure to hit like and subscribe so the algorithm can find the show for others. And of course, we're again joined today by Burke Brown. Burke, welcome.
Thank you, man. Glad to be here.
Different
Different
environment.
environment. There we go.
Go ahead.
Just different environment. I got a different background, but I'm just as much here.
Oh yeah, man, it looks great, man. It looks fantastic for sure. So, in this roadmaps to resilience, I got to thinking about how critical relationships are in our life to support us, sustain us. Sometimes relationships can be challenging, and so when you're going after those hard things and those big goals and those challenging times, sometimes relationships could work for us and sometimes be challenging for sure. And I came across this really, really interesting article that I thought was sort of interesting to go through. I'm going to do it a little different today, where normally we have a series of questions on a topic. And this one's quite a little bit different, but I think it'll be one that really resonates with a lot of people in the audience. So the title of the topic is "Where Have All the Good Men Gone? The Dating Reality for Women Seeking the One." And this really goes through sort of a sequence, if you will, as to sort of how men have sort of navigated and migrated in a relational sense. And as I read this thing, it says overwhelmingly the question is posed by women, discussed by women, and answered by women. But I can tell you where all the good men have gone, says the author. And by the way, I'll post this link in the section on YouTube, so you can go ahead and click on it and take a look at it. But certainly there's, Burke, there's dozens of anecdotes, there's articles, there's blogs, there's books on this topic, right? And I think overwhelmingly this question is posed by women, because it's for men, and discussed by women, answered by women. And in this article, it goes on to say that this ironically is an essential reason for this so-called man deserts. And if you look at some articles out there, as I did in my research, it's been termed man desert, where men are simply not being asked to contribute their opinions, perspective, and the good men themselves are increasingly less likely to offer their point of view for many reasons. As you've come across your research, because you are a guru when it comes to relationships, whether it be in business, personal, what have you seen as it comes to men and how they view these relationships? Is this something you've come across?
You know what? Relationships are they're such interesting things in general. And at the end of the day, one of the most important things is just mutual understanding, right? It's this ability for every voice to be heard, no voice to be suppressed, no emotion to be unallowed. It's just about allowing people to express themselves with the end in mind. And what I always say is it's not about who's right, it's about what's right. It's about focusing on the end goal. It's about facing the challenges together as opposed to your challenge versus my challenge, or you did it or I did it. It's taking away the blame, taking away the identification of the wrong, focusing on the wrong itself, and being willing to just hear each other out. I mean, it's a difficult thing, especially when you're emotionally charged. But again, it's always this mutual understanding that's required no matter what, if you want the relationship to work.
Yeah, 100%. And, I was reading on here, it said the last 100 years of suffrage, feminist, political correctness have challenged and continue to challenge thousands of years of patriarchy, which is, and rightfully so, right? I mean, that's not a bad thing. And consequently, the roles of both men and women have transformed and redefined themselves. And it says, while we struggle to adjust to the new and evolving status quo, it's had its casualties. I mean, look at the divorce rate in Western culture. I think in the U.S., it's hovering near 50, north of 50%. In the UK, 42%. Subsequent marriages are even worse. And I think the specter of divorce is certainly a contributing factor in this what he would call a conspicuously expanding man desert. Right? Many men have seen their fathers broken by divorce, fear the loss of their assets, their homes, their children, and are simply stacking their chips, choosing not to gamble and checking out of what they call the marriage casino. So I think there's been a lot of good that's happened in terms of empowering women, giving them opportunity, giving them voice. Very, very important. But what's interesting about this article is sort of how the sort of side effects of that for men trying to navigate whatever this normal is. And as they've gone through some really tough times, choosing maybe not to put their hand in that perceived fire, if you will.
Yeah. You know what? I think it's kind of one of the things that's just so there's an adjustment period for all things, right? If you look at the civil rights movement, there is an adjustment period, and there's still an adjustment period. Obviously, as we can see, there's a lot that's going on. And I feel that as we're moving towards this run towards equality, right? Towards this space of everyone's voice counting, there's going to be bounces. There's going to be these kind of ricochets that happen. And it's the process of finding identity. Specifically in this time. And, this is a time for us as men to be able to understand that there needs to be an opening up. There needs to be this awareness, and there's going to be a ricochet. It's the nature of the thing. But again, it comes back to the importance of communication. It comes back to the I want to understand, right? Because when I come in seeking first to understand as opposed to being understood, then all of a sudden voices can be heard. And when voices can be heard, we can come to a better understanding of how we as a human society can work. Like, how do we work when we're all winners? There's people that believe in win-lose, and there's people that believe in win-win. And if we really push for that, it makes the possibility of navigating this space more attainable. Really, I just feel like that's really where we're trying to get to. But again, it comes with humility and understanding. Like level one, humility and understanding. And there is no wrong emotion, right? You have to express it. And then when it's expressed, we dig into it and we see, okay, looking at the experiences you've had, how you've been accustomed to the world. Yes, you may feel certain things as the tables have shifted. How do you navigate that? How do you communicate in that space? I think it's so important. At the end of the day, with all relationships, it's about communication.
Yeah, that's well said. It's never simple, right? There's no simple answer to any of this stuff. But I do believe that in the Western world, where they're trying to push for better rights for women, better opportunities, at point to even vote for a president, to take on increasing roles within corporate America. I think there's been some very, very positive things for women that needed to happen for sure. But some of the institutions, such as divorce court, for example, maybe haven't caught up to the realities of the world, right? And so they tend to, because mothers are mothers and they're so awesome with kids and babies and youngsters, it's natural to say, well, if a divorce happens, they should be taking care of the kids. But I think as things have sort of evolved, some of those institutions, such as divorce court in those areas, really haven't kept up with the times. And I don't know if you remember, but Buckingham Palace a few years ago, a guy was in a Superman suit and he jumped over the wall. His whole point was trying to get rights for fathers who have been through divorce, right? Just trying to say, hey, we're out here, we matter, we're important to our kids' lives. And again, I think in this article, this guy was saying that some of these things really haven't caught up with some of the great progress that women have made. And as a result, when men go through that experience, they tend to be more reticent, more reserved, like, they see a different picture, if you will.
Yeah, I can't talk too much with the divorce process and litigation. I've actually seen it moving in the opposite direction. Maybe I can talk on that too, because I've actually started to see, in fact, my sister went through a divorce and it flipped. Like what you would have expected normally to happen in the 90s has really started to make a shift in the other direction, where it's become more of an equal depending on what the kid is accustomed to and all that different stuff. So as I'm talking about this, I'm going to probably, like, if I have a different perspective or a different thought, I'll share that as well. Is that cool?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's good. It's funny. I was reading some statistics, and about 90% of the time, women get custody of the kids, and one can make a strong argument for that. And I don't think the point of the article was, let's judge that. It's just that as things have changed so radically, right? More and more women are in the workplace. More and more women have obligations. They have to bring home money, right? That as that dynamics change, some of these other institutions have been somewhat slow to sort of catch on that, we don't want to totally eliminate the father from the picture, if you will, right? And make it so difficult where maybe they see him every other, weekend kind of thing. And then that, again, it kind of then feeds into where have all the good men gone? If you've gone through that grinder of an experience, like my experience was different. I got custody of my kids, but I could only imagine if it was every other weekend, and trying to have that connection and feeling like you're involved and you're important. And then maybe you have another guy come in the picture. Emotionally, those are very, very challenging experiences, right? And so, then you're probably more natural to pull back from that. And I think there's also a part where, if you look at media, there's a lot of stereotypes, right? About, I don't know if you've noticed, like with kids, they always sort of project and they sort of show parents as less than capable, kind of stumbling, bumbling, and certainly men are at the apex of stumbling, bumbling. And then I think you see that within kids, if they're part of that dynamic, right? You're coming through a divorce, your dad's not really around like he was. And then you go to school and you can look at statistics that there's a whole lot more women teachers than men teachers, right? So then what you realize is that when you think about role models for boys as they go through this process, probably aren't balanced. So that was kind of the point of this article. Like the role models are sort of out of whack a little bit.
Right.
And, so it's really a question like, how can we solve that? And how does that impact the man that's gone through that? They
Right.
probably don't want
You
to
know
go,
what?
again, if you will.
And I think it's kind of, the divorce process is a very difficult process. From the people that I know that are close to me, it's not easy. It's not easy for anyone. The children are taking such a huge hit at the same time. In each individual situation, there's different reasonings for why it happens. I've seen the court system really kind of make a way towards really asking, what is the child accustomed to? What is best for the child? I think that's the best approach. But let's say we take that aside, the devastation, the collateral damage that shows up really can cause people to close up in general. Like, I don't want to go through this again. And it's tough because when I look at it, the issue that's the biggest and kind of like not talked about, the divorce is a symptom of a sickness, right? These things that cause people to close up, whether man or woman, that make relationships as, we're in this kind of, what do you call it? What was that like famous app that everybody was using? Tinder, right? Where everything has been commodified. It's all about transaction. Relationships have become transactional. We have to look at the heart of the issue. The reason that people close up is because they don't want to be hurt. And because they don't want to be hurt, they don't open up. And so when they don't open up, they put on a face. And so when the face is put on, you have two faces that aren't the mask, let's say, two masks that are talking to each other. And this mask really likes this mask, right? But then all of a sudden, once they feel comfortable to take off the mask, that's where that separation happens. That's where it feels like the lie happens. So people are trying to put up this projection of what they're supposed to be, and they're not getting to the nitty gritty. The problem with divorce is not divorce itself. It's the narrative of what men are supposed to be in the world and what women are supposed to be. It's the stories that we have pushed onto people and not allowed them to be their true selves. That's why my work is always about how do you improve, how do you empower people to be better versions of their authentic selves. We as men or as women, as whatever titles we create, we feel that we stick ourselves into the category. But if we understand that it's not about your title, if we understand that it's about who you are authentically and searching for that frequency, then it becomes that much easier to choose a mate. Then it becomes that much easier to trust yourself, to be vulnerable, to be willing to be hurt, to be willing to engage as your authentic self. But the problem is, there's a great quote. It says, for every 1,000 hacking at the leaves of evil, there's one chopped at the root. When we look at all the problems in our society between men, women, black, white, Christian, Muslim, whatever dichotomies you want to create, what happens is we're hacking at those leaves of evil and we don't understand what the root causes are, right? Everything else is just symptomatic. And if we can honestly get to the root causes, that's where we get free of the whole blame game and try to understand. Now, if there's one group that's oppressive to the other, well, revolution makes sense. But when there's a desire to become better, that's where communication becomes so important.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And, in this article goes on to say how, boys don't really have the male role model. And then when if you look at college statistics, a lot more women are going to college and graduating versus men. If you just look at the sheer numbers, right? And he was saying that young girls are achieving significantly higher academic standards than young boys. And, this sort of approach has spilled over the universities and workplace and eventually the home. And he was saying that he was born in '68, which is an interesting time. And this author actually grew up in a home with his mother and four sisters, strong sisters, and no father, he said. And he was really taught by his mom. And that's kind of gave him his worldview and his perspective. And so he went on to say that, for a long time, women were really getting the short end of the stick. And that's probably true, right? And that sort of flipped a little bit. And he would argue there's really no winners in this scenario. And he also brought up something really interesting, Burkett, that I thought was fascinating, in that when women are coming up like this and going to school and meeting with this kind of success that maybe traditionally hasn't been the case, you get a whole different level of competitiveness. He'd call it relentless competitive struggle to determine who wears the trousers in the home, right? Many are just, he was saying that for men, trying to figure out where they fit in this sort of new dynamic, he would say that many men are just opting out of this kind of psychological warfare in this common relationships today, where it's a sort of a competitive struggle. I read this article about a woman who had she even said she had a phenomenal husband. They had 4 kids together, married for 8 years, right? And then she got the promotion where she started making a lot more money, which required what? More work hours. And so the husband sort of was, his hours were sort of, oscillating. And so he would stay home, take care of the kids and do the dishes and do the dinner, which got her more and more angry. And eventually she ended up in an affair and ended up leaving the marriage, to only come back and find out that she spent thousands of dollars in therapy, and she realized that she was sort of the issue. And of course she came back, and the guy said, I love you, honey, but I can't go through this again. You broke me. He said it, right? And so I think there's this, staying humble is important, Burke, right? But sometimes there's this competitive aspect. And I think a lot of men say, look, I got my competition sort of quota filled in the business arena. When I come home, maybe I want a little different dynamic. So I found this to sort of be an interesting part of the article.
Yeah, this is a difficult topic, man, because when you look at the arc of time, right? The arc of time is this suffrage, right? This oppression that's been happening for so long with women, and this moment of shift, and this generation of men are suffering it, right? It's almost a drop in the bucket to the whole narrative. It's difficult and it's hard, and I understand it, and I think it is important to be discussed. But I think what I always want to do is step back and say, let me look at the arc of time, right? Let me look at the way things have been. And so as this shift has happened, it's created that difficulty to navigate. And I think that it's almost like when you look at a pendulum, when a pendulum swings, it goes this far, then it goes this far. And then as time goes by, it finds its center, right? And I think what happens is that we kind of, as a human species in this point in modern time, we're learning to find what that looks like, right? Right. So pretty much if we look over the arc of time, and then right now we're in this space where equality is really starting to push and people are demanding their rights, it's a drop in the bucket to the grand scheme of how things have been. And so every fight, when you look at war, there's collateral damage, there's people that are innocent that suffer, right? But it's kind of the process of us moving forward. It's the process of us figuring out how this works. To be honest, I think the competition is okay. I think that us trying to rediscover how we're going to fit in this new world is part of the process of that evolution. If you look at evolution, all it is successful failures over time, right? It fails its way to success. And so I think what is better than what was, right? And now that we're here, there is a better. Right? And that's my definition of excellence. If better is possible, good is not enough. So we look at this situation, we see what's going on. Yes, right now there's been a seemingly shift of power, right? And the shift of power to people who have been in power feels like an entire flip of the script. Like, oh my God, what has been is no longer. But what I think is that as we kind of get to this space, there are still inequalities. There's still that competitive nature. I understand it as any person. If I was competing against my own cousin, which when I was younger, I was competing against them because that was the aim. I wanted to achieve at the same level, if not more. I didn't want to hit any type of ceiling. I wanted to continue to blossom and to continue to grow. So I think what it is growing pains. I think where we're at is growing pains. Now, that doesn't mean this is just the way it is, let it be. It comes back to, again, as we see these stories, such as the one you shared, we dissect it. We try to understand the psychology of it. We try to understand that what is that impetus for that competitive? What is that impetus for having to be the breadwinner for either the man or the woman, the human, whoever it is within the organization of the family. And each family is its own pod. And so it's their job to communicate, not because of some national story about what's happening, but in my family, as for me and my household, how are we going to exist together, right? Am I willing to, if I'm the man, if my wife is making more, doing more, and that's what she wants, and it ties to her authentic self, by all means. But if my authentic self is I want to be with my kids and my children, the story of blue for men, pink for women, that kind of erases, and it's what's your color? What's your authentic color? What's your authentic color? And if there is that headbutting, the question is, did you really understand what your core values were before getting into that relationship? Did you understand that? I don't, the noise around me is not as important as me and the person that I'm with. And when I say, what are we going to stand for? Yeah, there's pressures from the outside world about the matriarchy, the patriarchy, all this different stuff. What are we going to do here, right? Now, to get an organization to do that, that's a different game, right? That's a whole different ballpark. And so, you know, when people are just looking at the bottom dollar and they're so used to having, you know, the you know, kind of C-suite looking like them, being like them, it makes it harder for these type of shifts to happen. So I will say the collateral damage of the process of equality is nothing compared to what's being gained in the process. That being said, these type of conversations are important because you have to see the perspective of where have all the good men gone, where are all the role models, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I think it really begs the question is how reflective are people?
Mm.
How deep and understanding are people when they get in these situations? Because statistically, 90% of women that earn more than men end up in divorce. They always look for the next level. And so if your culture is not based on ethics, morals, or whatever you call it, some higher standard of yourself, some higher calling, something that's eternal, and it's just built on what you can have now. I want what I want when I want it. That sort of philosophy. That's a reality that 90% of women that go on to make more and have a better career end up opting out of that, even with kids. And so again,
Yeah.
this is about where have all the good men gone? And I think you're right. There's this transitional phase that people are going through, men are going through, trying to figure it all out.
Right.
What is my role? What is masculinity versus not? Right. We've certainly read a lot of books on that. And there's this thing I came across in this article where he called it MGTOW. I don't know if you've heard of that, or MGTOW. It's called Men Going Their Own Way, right? And I think there's a lot of women that would desire leadership, and maybe they're a single mom and have that come back in. And I think it's an honest discussion needs to have or be had around the idea of what is the role of a man. And by the way, next week I'm going to have a really good one on the woman's experience. This isn't just to bag on women, but this is men trying to figure it all out, right? Real time with kids in tow. Real lives at stake. Like, what's your future going to be? How am I impacting that future? And what am I basing those decisions on? Is it based in wisdom? Is it walking with foresight of the future? Or is it just in the momentary, pleasure of I'm a title, a VP, a president. I went from Y to X, and I can do things I can only dream of in the past, right? So this idea though that men kind of going their own way. I think this conversation is important because if we're to get sort of to the bottom of it, you have to sort of talk about that elephant in the room. And this, again, is not to point fingers. This is just to try to raise the level of understanding of maybe what one sex is going through versus the other.
Yeah. I think it's with my research, one of the things is they say, correlation versus causality. You can see that a thing is correlated, but it may not cause it. So, I wouldn't use divorce as a explanation of a thing. So, because I could argue, let's say that if a woman makes a certain amount of salary, ends up in divorce, 90% end up in divorce. I could rephrase that where I say if a man sees that his wife is making more money than he is, 90% of those relationships end up in divorce. So you can kind of approach it from different angles. And again, it's the symptom more than it is the situation that's happening, at a granular level. What I really always want to point back to, and where my expertise is, because this is not my expertise in terms of men versus women, it's relationships and it's individuals. Like that's really where my work is at. And I stay in my lane there. But what I always come back to is if you don't know who you are authentically, then you will buck when the system works against you, right? If you don't know who you are at a fundamental level, and if you don't know that if you aren't clear on the outcome you want with your relationship, then it will disintegrate. It's just bound to happen. So it's always coming back to authenticity. It's always coming back to who you are as an individual. What I will say in terms of the role models, to be honest, my frustration is directed at the media. My frustration is directed at the story of what a man is. My frustration is directed at what is portrayed as being masculine and that masculine energy. And I don't like that masculine energy can only be held for men. It can go, I can have feminine energy as well as masculine energy. Just a woman can have masculine energy as well as feminine. But what's happened is we've been so conditioned in our society to believe that this is what I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to do. I'm not supposed to cry or share my emotions, right? If I am applauded if I am promiscuous, while a woman is considered fill in name, right?
Right.
So these mixed signals are destructive, and they cause people to engage in wars that are not even their own. Men need men in their lives. That's just a fact. They need the father figures. They need mentors. That's something that's so important. And so there's a calling for men to be like, okay, I understand the way that I'm supposed to be as society tells it, but what makes me feel whole?
I think, man, this is so important because when men become emotionally unavailable, what do they end up doing? They end up doing probably some unhealthy things. I mean, in terms of their ability to connect with the opposite sex, in terms of their ability to be real, and in terms of their ability not to have to go 5 years down the road where they meet that ultimate person, and then they have this whole Titanic worth of baggage choices that have just stopped their maybe ability to go to that next opportunity. And so he said in this article, which I found interesting, he goes, you know, the essential precepts of going your own way is financial independence, rejection of chivalry. We've seen that. Social preconceptions of what a man should be, and consumer culture, which defines masculinity by a man's house, cars, clothes, watch, and cologne. Right? It's the refusal to be shamed into conventional compliance by being told to man up. And so again, I think, you know, we did all those things. We met our first love, right? And we went through that process, and it spectacularly blew up because I've been through divorce. You spent a lot of money, right? And so you say, hey, I'm just going to go my own way. And then you're bucking everything maybe your mom and dad built into you, you know, in your hard drive, right? So yeah, it's really a dynamic tension going on, I'd argue.
It really is, man. And I think that what you said right there, that's the main point. That's where I always, like I said, I look for the root. I look for the root. I don't get caught up in certain conversations. He said, she said. I'm like, what's going on underneath, right? You ever heard of the iceberg? What you have is the iceberg is what's visible above the water. That's the emotion, the topic, the headlines, the surface. Then under it are unmet needs, our repressed energies and emotions, or trauma that we've experienced as we go down. I'm under the water. Right? When people are arguing about this, that, men are from Venus, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, whenever that, and these are great conversations that people get at. But for me, I'm just like, I go down because it's not my place to be up there, because it's so easy for any word that you say to be used against you or flipped around or da-da-da, or a side to be taken. I'm not there. I don't have time for it. I care about what's going on underneath, because underneath it all, there is no sex. There is an emotional spirit, right? There's the human being. That beingness is what I deal with. And so when you look at this being that we could call men, who are told to look a certain way, be a certain way, act a certain way, and if you do this, then you are weak, right? And then using that weakness is womanly or feminine in some way, you're automatically inferring this, right? And so what happens is there's this crazy dance that's happening of people who don't know themselves. This is not an argument of anything other than I don't know who I am. Because if I know who I am, all of a sudden my skin becomes less relevant, right? My manhood, or being a man physically, the biology becomes less relevant, right? Now they're all variables. We honor that, we accept it, and we love the diversity of that. But I'm not going to ascribe to your story of what a man is. And I've been tempted to growing up, always. You start to believe you're supposed to be this way. You're supposed to act this way. And if you don't, then you're wasting your God-given abilities. But then I realized that's not who I am. That's not what I'm about. And since that's not who I am and not what I'm about, then I'm going to discover what's authentically me. So you can now, since I know what I am, you can now have that, media tell you what you're supposed to be. But if it doesn't resonate, it repulses. It goes out, it repels, it goes away. It's not important to me. And so what I think is men really need to get to a space, and it's tough because our society has really erased the power of what a man is, right? It erased the sense of that kind of moral figure that has the ethical responsibility to be true, to help realign, to teach people to be aligned. It doesn't exist. All it is the house, the money, the cars, whatever it is, or even being woke, that whole game of that. What you take all that away and you become you. And then when you are you happen to do these things or not do these things. I'm not going to define myself by what I'm driving or by how I speak or what I look like. I'm defining myself by what resonates my soul. And I do know that role models don't exist, so it's my job to become that. We were talking about legacy yesterday or last week. That's what my job is, to build that legacy. And if I was a woman, that's my job still, to build that legacy, right? Is to erase myself of whatever things are standing in the way that are telling me to make myself look good only by comparison, because I'm only as smart as I am compared to someone who's less smart than me or more smart than me. So I'm not going to play that competitive game.
And there's
Was
always
it?
somebody better than you at something, right? So it's a fool's errand to go down that road. And it's funny what
Absolutely.
it's funny what you said was really resonant. I think when anybody goes through difficult times, whether it be divorce, loss of a job, loss of a loved one, whatever it may be, why it's so important to have a foundation in your life. Why it so matters that you don't build your foundation on things that blow away when the winds come up is because you don't know who you really are. And in that time of not knowing who you really are, you can do a whole lot of damage to your soul at a soul level. Your confidence, right? You've seen so many men broken by divorce or whatever. They were strong, they were articulate, and they got into a situation and they completely lost themselves and their ethos and who they are. And in this article, this is another punchline moment in this article, Burke. And I think it'll resonate with a lot of people out there. And it says, many aggrieved megtos, or men going their own way, refuse to marry or even date Western women. The more ardent among them consciously choosing non-committal relationships, think friends with benefits, think hooking up, strippers, pornography, or celibacy. Above all, goes the Megto mantra, maintain sovereignty of self. They want nothing to do with anybody. If they do engage, it's probably not the most wholesome, healthy thing to engage in. So it has some real solid impact. And why does it matter? So women say, okay, so that's a group of losers out there. Well, here's the problem. Women can come across these very same men that are probably good people, except they made some choices and they get sucked into the undercurrent of a lifestyle or way of being for the last 7 years or 8 years. And then rationalization and justification all tend to creep into it. And then these women are left disillusioned. Why? Where have all the good men gone? I thought you were this guy. You ended up being this guy, and I didn't find out for 3 years, right? So character really matters. And I was in a situation one time where the person really didn't reveal some really tough stuff for about 3 years into it, right? And that's, if you don't have a relationship built on trust, kind of a tough way to go. But, for men that have been aggrieved or hurt and they sort of show behavior and action to make choices, by the way, it really affects women, and women that are single moms and have kids in tow, that's also an impactor.
Yeah. It's real. And I've seen it on both sides of the spectrum. I've seen, very recently where this guy claimed to be one thing and was absolutely not it in any way, shape, or form. And she found out in the marriage.
Yeah.
That's the individual. I do think that in essence, when we are, finding, this is what's so dangerous about, finding the one and all these things. It's Disney, they lived happily ever after. The narrative in the story is a lie. It's like Instagram. You have these Photoshop bodies which create a deficit, a self-perception of lowliness. It's embedded into the system. And so our story is, who's the one? Will I find the one? I'm so afraid of being alone. But those are narratives that are not your own. These are movies that you've watched over time. Being alone is one of the most incredible things in the world. In fact, I look forward to it, right? But most people don't. And a lot of my clients, men and women, were so afraid of just a Friday night with nothing because it told them some narrative about what they are or are not, right? And so what happens is the narrative that you tie to the situation is what determines kind of the reality of it for you, right? And you go down that space. So one client who was so terrified, just the idea of shopping alone on a Friday night meant that she was alone. She was a loser. I've had one of my clients that was a man, not having a party or someplace to go to at night on Friday. But the truth is, as time went by, they realized, oh my God, this is my most precious time. You see, the one that you're trying to find is yourself. And at any moment that something that you are finding, looking for, the one thing that'll change everything, as soon as it exits you, then all problems, all perspectives, all opinions, all suggestive ideas become your new lead. That's what starts to put you down that rabbit hole and carry you where you don't want to go. So it really always comes back to your own individual perspective. And it frustrates people when I say this, because I never blame large conglomerate groups. Like, I'm not like, oh, I'm saying, what are you doing right now? Because at the end of the day, it's what you do that determines whether you're either part of the problem or part of the solution.
I mean, it all comes down to mindset of responsibility, right? I mean,
that 100, it is always down to personal responsibility. Now, I could step against myself and argue an opposite point, right? When we're looking at the larger picture of what we're trying to do towards equality, works in terms of pay, in terms of all these things, I can argue that opposite point. But what I always start with the individual. Once I get clear on the individual, then we can start to move in those other spaces. That's really where the magic's at. When I do my work, when I'm talking to an organization trying to change culture, I start with your individual values. I start with you. And what it becomes is a self-help, self-development session. They're like, whoa, I'm getting so much out of it. And as soon as they realize how good it feels for them to be them, and then see someone else who explains their authenticity, and you see that synergy between it, then you can look towards the organization and find out how to change that culture. But I'm not going to top-down matriculate it from, here's the culture we have, now reflect that. No, this is what we already have that we share. Now reflect that up, right? And that's the power. That's the important thing. So responsibility. Absolutely.
You know, it's funny. I heard this mafia guy the other day on a podcast, and he was talking about his experience, and he got put in jail for 20 years because somebody ratted on him. But what I liked about what he says, he goes, it wasn't the guy that ratted on him why he was in there. He goes, I put myself there. All my choices up to that point, it was my responsibility that got me there, which is interesting to say, because he took full responsibility for his 20 years, time served. But, this is all a big thrust for equality, right? There's been such an imbalance or unbalance. We talked about this before, that in nature, natural law are flying. If you have an imbalance in the law of aerodynamics, the wings will not fly, right? So everything in natural law or in the environment requires a balance to operate, at a high level. And it's no different between equality of the sexes and what's the outcome we're trying to drive for. But in this article, he goes, equality is not always sameness. Difference is diversity, right? And should be a cause for celebration, not dogmatic elimination. He said, men are often told that they are afraid of strong, independent women. Many men, tired of such field debates, wary of being branded a misogynist, according to this guy, just walk away and become emotionally unavailable, because, that's like lighting a match. It's like, strike it and you can get some major blowback, right? And he said in this article, which I agree, the truth is men love strong, independent women. He says it turns them on in every way. And what men don't love are the predominantly masculine traits that go off along with the package. And these, I would say, traits are really manufactured by marketing and other things of maybe what a woman should be like to project the power and whatever. Mm-hmm. In my personal experience, the most impressive women I've come across are absolutely powerful, competent, but have fully embraced their, womanhood, their uniqueness as a woman. Because I would argue they got a lot more talents than men. And they can do 5 things at once, 10 things at once at a high level, where a guy could do 1 thing at once, maybe okay, right? I mean,
right.
I think they have been given some advantages, no question. The fact that they can mother a child and perform at a seriously high level within the corporate work environment. But he also says something interesting. He says they don't like the predominantly masculine traits, because again, you can say, hey, the change is good, but if you're a man and you're genetically encoded that way, trying to figure out where you fit in, the alpha male, the testosterone, certainly it's good to moderate it, but he goes on to say that the relentless competitiveness necessary in the workplace, no doubt, but hardly necessary at home in a loving relationship, the verbal aggression, the emotional manipulation, and the psychological controlling aspects of certain relationships are turnoffs. By the way, I'd say for both men and women, because it happens on both sides of the ledger. This isn't just it coming from one direction, but for men, as they've gone through this and they see the power structure change, these are all elements, according to this author, that's just like, it's a turn off and I'll just go to my man cave and check out.
Right. And that's, that's if I'm talking in his language and, the generalizations of, women do this or men do that. I don't speak that language, but what I will say is, if you turn off, that's your fault, right? That's your inability to deal with the new world, right? That's your problem. And I think that this is where kind of we can work to say, no, feel your emotions. Oh, you feel that you've lost power? Feel that, be in it. Think about what you have lived for generations like that, right? Like, take it in for a second. Be like, it sucks that you happen to be born where there is a tilt, right? But this is where we're at. This is what exists. And so this evolution is required. The evolution is required for us to move to that next level. And I love the diversity of ideas and diversity of experiences. I don't have a definition of feminine or masculine. I don't hold that this is what womanhood is, this is what manhood is. What I do hold is what authenticity is. So when I see a woman or man who says, I want to be a teacher, and they're a teacher, that's authentic. That's you. That's your man, right? This is okay. You want to be a CEO. If a woman wants to be, then that's authentic to who she is. Not about a story of competing, as men have that story of competing because they want to be that looked a certain way. If it's in alignment with who they are, then yes. If it's in alignment with who they are. But if any human is trying to prove something, then they've lost something because they need the world to know it in order for them to know it. That's where the problem lies.
Great point.
It's always about that. When the story, I do something outside of me against you to make me feel better, that's where the sickness is. And that's
Right.
what we have to look at. It's all based on individuals. I'm more power. I don't care how much the structures are being all jacked up and people are pouting and mad and frustrated and closing off. Like, all of this needs to happen. Stir the pot. It can't be the way it was. It's not allowed. It won't be. And I for one, won't allow it. Right? Because I have skin in the game in so many different ways. Yes, I'm a man, but I'm also an African American. So I understand the suffering at the same time, right? And so it's a beautiful thing, because what happens is you have the eyes to see and understand why this is happening, why these shifts are happening, why men are closing off or women are opening up, whatever it is. But I say this, it's good. Like good.
Yeah.
Person closes off their own weakness. But if you have to be engaged, to say, hey, you know what, this doesn't feel right, but it's not authentic, and this person's being authentic, and I'm not going to try to judge them and say that they're supposed to fit into this box. No, if you're looking for a certain type of person, right, that's authentic and resonates with you, then do that. It's not whether they're independent, strong, competitive, masculine, that's all irrelevant. All that matters is, does it align with who you are? And if you don't know, that means you don't know who you are. And therefore, that's the work that you need to do. Everything else to me becomes irrelevant.
And it's really challenging in this world, right? Because there's so many mixed messages of what success is, what being a stud woman or stud man is, right? And at a young age, you buy off of that. You may miss some opportunities along the way, but that's, maybe it's called natural selection. It is what it is. And people will learn great lessons from those experiences as they sort of architected their life, if you will. And so the article goes on to say that increasingly men aren't interested in competing both at work and home. And what was cool about this was, he says, and women are not interested in emasculated feminine men necessarily. They want a man's man at home, take care of stuff. So it's kind of this equality thing is about balance. Again, it goes back to, I would argue, in a relationship is, if you can always think about the relationship in terms of a balance. There's a time where it's okay for the man to go do his man thing, and certainly for women to do her thing. There's a time in a career for both to shine exceptionally well. But if we could always go back from a perspective of balance, I think that's to me where the opportunity lies. And I think that, when we think about solutions, and this article goes into some solutions, waking up to our social conditioning is a good place to start. And you've spoken about this, Berkay. A lot of this is social conditioning. It's social construct. And someday you may wake up and saying, was that really me? Was that what I really wanted? And therein lies opportunities for therapists and a number of people come along your side and say, let's get some perspective on it, right? Let's try to understand in context. He goes on to say that many women are beginning to reject the modern brand of feminism, the so-called third wave, that is tantamount to thinly veiled misandry, whatever that is. Anyway, so he's saying that things are starting to change a little bit, right? And he would say that there's clearly work to be done on both sides. And he just feels that, there's a better way forward, one with communication, one with understanding.
Yes.
Because from my vantage point, I remember I was in the Air Force and pilot training. This is back in 89, 90. And there was a woman fighter pilot from the Netherlands. I thought that was the coolest thing, because you have to understand, in the military at that time, there was no women fighter pilots. That's changed since. But that to me was just like, wow, that is cool, because I knew what it took to get to that point and go through that process. And I always remember that. It was like, if people put their mind to it and assuming they have the physical attributes and mental attributes, there's not a whole lot that people can't do if they put their mind to it. And I would argue that for whether it be a woman or man, but let's talk about women, if they're able to be engaged in something that brings them pure joy, express their passions, express their talents that God's given them, then that should happen, right? It's just a matter of balancing out the perspective. And I think when you're younger, ego plays a big role in decision-making. And as you get older, you start to get things in a little different context, if you will.
Yeah. I love the idea of balance. And the balance isn't like the male-female balance. It's the you-me balance, right? Now, at the same time, if you look at it on a kind of more global perspective, yes, of course, the equality and the diversity and all that stuff, yes. But when I look at an ecosystem, I always go back to nature. When I doubt anything, I go back to nature because nature's kind of gotten it. They've been doing it for a while, right? And so, like I mentioned before, an organism that breathes in oxygen and breathes out carbon, right? Carbon dioxide. And the tree right there, it does the opposite. We work together. And so it doesn't mean that we're the same, but we understand that we both have skin in the game, and unconsciously we naturally do the good thing for each other. And I think that there is no, the label of the man and the woman is irrelevant to the energies, right? It's if my authenticity, my authentic oxygen feeds your authentic carbon, then we're in that good space. And so we start to maneuver and move in a way to where we have that type of ecosystem. Now, this is grand and this is also ethereal, so I understand that, but it's for me, before I get into conversations, I want to speak to the people that are experiencing the real thing. So we had these statistics, we had all this stuff that we talked about, them, they, we have all that. I want to sit and I want to hear the perspective of that person individually, right? Because even if this person and this person say they're on the same team fighting for the same thing, if I listen to them, I see the nuances in their values. And then I can get more of a better understanding of kind of what's exactly going on. At the end of the day, if we were to talk to men need to step up, right? Men need to step up. The fact that this man felt the need to express this thing means that he's almost a voice for a group of people that have not engaged. And one of the most important things about evolving as a human being is facing challenges directly with an open heart, with vulnerability, with the desire to understand and be understood, and not just bucket the way things are, because that's childish, right? And so I think that my work always comes back to humanity. And this is me. This is where I am. When a person becomes humane, when they really tie to that, then there's no walls that stop them from being humane because they're so connected. There's a cognitive dissonance not to be humane. So if I'm inhumane, that's me closing up. That's me running away from the problem. That's me being mad about, oh, the way this is all happening, or oh, the feminists, or oh, the patriot. Like, if you get too overwhelmed with what's happening on the outside and not staying centered on the inside, you're gone. You're in the current. That's the problem. That's why I love Jesus. It says, like, early in the morning before everybody was awake, he went out to pray because he went and got his center strength, then came into the war. I'm not going to get so emotionally hijacked by what's going on the top of the iceberg. I center, I sink, I come in, I say what I am authentically, and then I speak authentically. And if somebody disagrees, I listen. If they're on the top of the iceberg and it's just emotional spewage, I understand where they are. I don't wear it. I'm always, if I disagree with myself in the future, I'm okay with that. If I disagree with the things I'm saying now, I'm okay with that because I'm authentic to truth as I see it, and I'm authentic to honestly discovering more. And I think that personal responsibility, that desire to grow, no matter what the external circumstances are, the desire to know someone at a deeper level and be known at a deeper level, that's what makes things more possible. And that's what makes life more enjoyable. I don't just want to win a fight. I want to know a person in the process, and I want a resolution. I want the ecosystem.
No, that's great, man. That's a lot to unpack right there. When I think about what's going on in America today, one could argue that everybody's shutting down emotionally. Everybody's full of anger, full of whatever, and fundamentally shutting down to being influenced. And I think if people were to say at 20 how they're showing up, and at 30 and 40 and 50, the only difference is insight and wisdom and understanding, right? And where you can see a different picture, maybe a bigger picture, maybe from 30,000 feet, the situation. And, I think this whole relationship with men and women is really a metaphor for life, because what happens in that bucket, that silo, tends to transcend into other silos, into other areas.
Mm.
And so it affects your career prospects. It affects your friend relationships. It affects how you perceive opportunity. It affects how you perceive risk. It affects what you're willing to risk and what you're willing to do and what you're willing to challenge yourself with. And so this is a small microcosm of a bigger picture. And I would argue that the opportunity is always growth, openness. And I remember I was listening to this guy from Antifa, and he got out. Why did he get out? Well, because as he learned more about the broader world and got a broader perspective, he realized that the perspective housed within that dogma was very limiting. And as it turned out in his opinion, wasn't truth. It's good to create certain energies in a certain direction if that's what your intent is, but therein lies the opportunity. I remember telling a group one time that when you argue a point, you probably know 0.00001% of that point. What you have it is an opinion, and that's it. You don't have a scientifically controlled study of that point, right? Where you say statistically, we've done 30, N of 30, or whatever the number is, and therefore scientifically, black is black and white is white. It's an opinion. And if we can go into everything with 2 ears open, one mouth closed, right? And try to learn as much as possible from other people's perspectives, even their pain, even their disappointment. Right. In this relational sense, it could probably help a lot of people, because what people are saying is, if I want to shy away from the sexes or relationships, or as a man to a woman, it just means I don't have greater insight and understanding in that situation. I'm taking one aspect that created a lot of pain, and we should learn from our pain, and I'm extrapolating that across every aspect of my life. And as what you said, that's not much of a life, man. That's like death while you're living. And so to be real and ethereal and wise and have perspective and understand where we all come from, much better way to live life, even though I would argue it's very short, but while it's short, it's probably maybe a better way to go about it.
Yeah. I really do think one of the things I tell every one of my clients the first day, I say, everything is everything. And what that means is that everything that happens can teach you something about life. And knowledge is not so much information stored, but it's contextualizing information. It's being able to correlate it with other bits of information. That's why analogies are so powerful. You're correlating a story with a narrative or a theme that you want to get across. And so when you look at, this topic just in general, what we feel like is, as soon as I believe that if this thing out there changes, then everything will be okay. Then the sickness has started. That's the C problem. Because at the end of the day, it really is about what I'm going to do inside here, right? When I do the work on me. So if I feel the temptation to close up because I don't like the way things are, I'm missing out on an opportunity to evolve, and I'm taking away from the amount of impact I can make in society as a whole, right? So for me, as I'm learning how to be me, I want to be able to impact others to do the same, right? To be themselves. And a true you is unconcerned with competition, is unconcerned with honor, disgrace, is unconcerned with friends or foes. It was Lao Tzu said that this is the highest state of man. He who speaks does not know. He who does not speak knows. Mask your brightness, temper your sharpness, be at one with the dust of the earth. And that's why I say the person who has nothing to prove proves everything already. And so if I come into the world not trying to prove anything, and I come in with a question mark, wanting to learn and absorb, and then try to help influence towards authenticity, then I'm no matter what, I'm in a good space. And wherever I'm wrong, because my goal is so clear, I'm willing to adjust my trajectory to get closer to that. I'm willing to be wrong, because wrong to me is proof of how to be closer to right. It's like evolution. This is how far the species goes, then it jumps, boom, right? And then it comes up to where we are today. And trust me, we are one of the dumbest things compared to what we could be, right? And so if we honor that and come from this place of, just like you said, I don't know. I think that's the wisest human being in the world. I don't really know. I want to know. I want to understand your perspective, and I want to share my perspective. But more importantly than understanding you and understanding me is I want to get to a space of resolution, a space where we are a better species, where we are better empowered human beings. And there is no delineation between man or woman, black or white, or all these different things. It's just, how do we push this thing forward to its highest potential?
Absolutely. Berkey, another masterclass. Thank you.
Always good, Ben.
Enjoy the conversation. Until next time.